Canadians will head to the ballot boxes on April the 28th to cast their votes. And we want to know here at Classic 107 where the parties that represent Manitoba on the federal level stand on arts and culture. We kicked off that conversation yesterday by hearing about what a potential Liberal government would do to support the arts. We were joined by Provencher candidate Trevor Kirchanov to have that conversation. You can find that conversation at our website and on the app, as well as a link to their full platform if you want to learn more. Today, we turn our focus to the NDP and what they are proposing on the arts and culture file. Jorge Requena Ramos is running for the NDP in Winnipeg South Centre. He joins us live in the Classic 107 studios this morning to help us explore the NDP's position on the arts. Good morning, Jorge, and thanks for joining us.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing okay. So you are also, in addition to a candidate, you are a musician, filmmaker, an arts administrator. You run the West End Cultural Centre. Why do you think, in your estimation, that the NDP makes the most sense for somebody who considers arts and culture to be a top voting issue for them?
The arts and culture are super important to us, but it's a policy that we have in our platform called Keeping Canada Canadian, and it extends to the Canadian identity and who we are as a Canadian people. And it really is more about who we are as Canadian peoples, because there is really many types of Canadians that are proud to call ourselves Canadians. And for the NDP, it is very important that we maintain the institutions that have helped build the Canadian identity, and we expand the institutions that have helped build Canadian identity. People don't normally think during their regular day that the things that we're going to be remembered for as a society sometimes is the art that we that we leave behind. Right? Like we know about the Renaissance because the 16th century, 17th century Italian painters and sculptors left us a body of work that represented the things that had happened during that Enlightenment. And when we go through an Enlightenment, one of the things that shines brightest is art. And so in the NDP, we recognize that those things that make us Canadian are important to build. The cultural pipeline of Canada is the CBC. The CBC started as an effort to keep Canada communicated, right? To use radio technology to communicate this vast country to itself. Right? And it has continued to do that. It has continued to tell Canadian stories to Canadians. The National Film Board, the mandate of the National Film Board is to describe Canada to Canadians and the rest of the world. The National Arts Council has done taken enormous steps to protect the arts environment of Canada and to keep Canada artistic, and to protect arts practice and fund arts practice in Canada. And certainly that's something that we're super eager to protect. Art is not only a beautiful thing, but it's also a form of expression. And it's into charter rights that freedom of expression includes the arts. Freedom of expression includes us artists creating things. And as in the NDP, we're very much about identities being included, where respect and power include, and including identities that have just landed in Canada, empowering and prioritizing Indigenous identities is super important. These things can be done through art.
So there's a lot to unpack in everything that you just said, but lots of the conversation in this election, you talk about the shoring up of these sort of cultural institutions like the National Film Board, like the Canada Council for the Arts. Lots of the conversation around this sort of protection of Canadian institutions and unique cultures has to also tie in with which party has the right approach to combat these sort of economic uncertainties and threats that are currently coming in from the United States. What role does the arts and culture sector have for the NDP in that regard for a potential government formed by your party?
It's important for us to remember that the arts have always been a self-sustaining industry. We in Canada, this is a very important thing that we do as Canadians. We fund a lot of the arts industries, and we fund artistic practice. Some of the artistic practices that we fund would very likely disappear if we didn't continue to fund them as a government. And so, but the music industry exists, whether you fund it or not, and the film industry exists, whether we fund it or not, but it's not going to be Canadian. right? Canadian content is a thing that many people have hum and had about, but it's necessary for us to be able to describe ourselves. And we live next to a cultural juggernaut that has billions and billions of dollars pumped into industries. And if we don't continue to chisel out our own work and prioritize our own work as Canadians, we're going to lose our identity as Canadians. If you don't want to be the 51st state, look at the artists. We are going to protect you from that.
Okay. What are you hearing from your potential constituents in Winnipeg South Centre as you speak with them about where arts and culture lies as a priority for them in this election?
I mean, because I'm the artist candidate in this election, I get a lot of artists coming into my court. Artists know their value and their worth, but they also know how to survive. A lot of us have experienced poverty. A lot of us have experienced, hardship, because choosing a life of artistic practice is hard. And it's hard to find how to pay bills, et cetera, et cetera. And so a lot of the things that the NDP is talking about in affordability is very attractive to artists. Artists want national rent control. Artists want a grocery price cap. Artists, want expanded benefits. Artists really want these things. Dental. Like, there's a lot of artists that have never had dental coverage, and are now going to have it. Pharmacare. There's a lot of artists that live with lifelong medical conditions, and now they're going to be able to afford their medication. So these things are actually pretty important. Leah Gazan talks about a universal basic income. One of the things that the universal basic income would do is it would create an enormous art scene, because all of a sudden these artists are actually free to practice, right? And so in a first world country, we really have the luxury of doing these things. Even in a silly tariff war, we still have the power to empower our community artists that continue to describe these communities to ourselves.
Yeah, what I'm hearing within all of that is not only a commitment from the NDP to help to shore up cultural institutions that are supporting artists, but also to add to the quality of life for what is otherwise rather precarious sorts of employment. We were speaking yesterday, as I mentioned, with the Liberal candidate from Provencher, talking also about shoring up these cultural institutions and providing that sort of support for artists. There are likely going to be lots of voters out there who are perhaps, if they're on the left-leaning side of that political spectrum, they're having to make a choice between the Liberals and the NDP in this election. What would you say to somebody who's considering both parties, arts and culture is their top priority, about why they should choose the NDP in that decision?
Yeah, Woody Guthrie wouldn't have voted for the Liberals. Neither would Stan Rogers. These people stood for the values of people and for community values. And that we have to recognize freedom from and freedom to. I think the Liberals are talking about freedom from the Conservatives, and the Conservatives are talking about freedom from the Liberals. And we are talking about freedom to be Canadian, freedom to do things. Freedom through community is the way that the NDP does things, and we believe that art is a very important part of that community feeling.
Okay. Reading through the NDP's platform, the policies surrounding arts and culture are a little bit trickier to find, but there is one thing that I would like to touch on, which is on the subject of culture. The platform does state, quote, "We would defend Canada's sovereignty, protecting essential Canadian industries like cultural sectors from being sold off or exploited by foreign interests. We would ensure Indigenous treaty rights, charter rights, French language and labor protections, and environmental safeguards are never sacrificed in trade negotiations," end quote. Maybe you can speak a little bit more to some of the ways that the NDP would work to ensure that sort of cultural sector and these cultural elements that make up Canada are secure from a more pragmatic sort of a standpoint.
Yeah, from a financial point of view, the ideas that the Conservatives and the Liberals and in the past have carried out have taken deep cuts into institutions like the CBC, into institutions like the National Arts Centre. I will admit that in the beginning of the Trudeau government, we felt I was working at the CBC, we felt that all of a sudden there was enough money to do things. But that was after a 14-year lag in underfunding, right? And so of course we felt like there was enough to do things. Carney's a financial guy. He's coming in from a finances, and he probably thinks pragmatically with money in his brain first. But that's not going to be good for arts institutions. Arts institutions need to be protected because they're the right thing to have, because they're what make us Canadian. They are going to cost money, but they're also going to give hundreds and thousands of jobs. The CBC employs, what do you think, 30,000 people across Canada? And so and they're good jobs, and they're good government jobs, right? And so those things are necessary. Dismantling these institutions and selling them off in pieces is only going to be as bad as it was to dismantle CN and selling out in pieces, and dismantle Air Canada and selling it off in pieces. It's just going to affect the artists most. And, artists are not going to stop making art, but we need to have an infrastructure for them to do it in a free way. And it's interesting you bring up, some of the conservative and liberal candidates also participate in the arts. And there's many scenes within the arts, many communities within the arts, right? The arts industry is really arts industries. We know that each diaspora community has their own art scene, and we know that there is a classical art scene, and there's a folk art scene that does everything around a fire, and so all of these things are Canadian art forms that are necessary. They all make the tapestry of Canada possible.
Yeah. So in times of economic uncertainty, there can be this perception, perhaps, that arts become something of a luxury item, and perhaps this perception is even heightened when our economy is under threat during a trade war with tariffs and the like. How would the NDP balance these sort of new cultural investments, shoring up these cultural institutions, while ensuring that those investments are made responsibly with the larger economy in mind?
Yeah, I think it's about morale. I think if we're gonna be able to keep our chin up during this trade war, and as we maybe slide into a recession, and as we are having to maybe cut some things out of the budget, we are gonna do it much better as Canadians, as long as we can stay together, and as long as we can stay, Canadian. As long as the Canadian identity is something that we find pride in, and the Canadian identity is something that includes us all in the conversation, and it's something that we know we can have the solace of, like, yes, but what we're doing, we're being ourselves. Self-determination is something that is super important to the NDP. It's something that is super important to Indigenous folks. It's something that is super important to queer folks and diaspora communities. And all of these things can be achievable through the arts. Identity-defining things are done through the arts. And so we can prioritize these things because they are going to help with our morale.
Okay. We'll leave it there for today. Jorge Requena Ramos, the NDP candidate for Winnipeg South Centre. Thank you so much for joining us in the Classic 107 studios to talk more about how the NDP would support the arts and culture sector.
Thanks for having me.